Most people think $500,000 is enough to retire. It's not even close. And the scary part? Most people won't find out until it's too late to fix it. Here's what the real math actually says. You're at your desk. Random Thursday afternoon. Slow day. You pull up a retirement calculator. You plug in your numbers. Age 32. Current savings $28,000. Annual income $58,000. Expected retirement age 65. The calculator spins, and there's this sinking feeling. The number it shows for what you'll have at 65. Even being optimistic, it's not enough. Not close to enough. The calculator says you need about $1.2 million to retire comfortably. You're on track for maybe $450,000. And you close the tab, because thinking about retirement at 32 feels both too far away to matter and too close to fix. So you just don't think about it. But that gap stays with you. That quiet realization that working until 65 might not actually be a choice. It might be a necessity, because the math doesn't work any other way. My name's Peter, and if you've ever run the retirement numbers and wondered why they look so impossible, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the retirement math everyone talks about is based on assumptions that don't match most people's lives. Let's fix that.
So, let's start with what retirement actually costs versus what people think it costs. Most retirement calculators tell you to aim for 80% of your current income in retirement. If you're making $58,000 now, you'll need about $46,000 a year to retire comfortably. That sounds reasonable. Less than you're making now because you won't be commuting, buying work clothes, paying into retirement accounts. But here's what $46,000 actually requires to sustain. The standard rule, the one every calculator uses, is the 4% rule. You need 25 times your annual expenses saved to retire. That's $1.15 million for someone needing $46,000 a year. $1.15 million. You're 32. You have $28,000 saved. You're contributing maybe 6% to your 401k, about $290 a month. At that rate, with average market returns, you'll have about $620,000 by 65, maybe $700,000 if returns are good. You're short by $450,000 minimum. And those numbers assume your expenses stay flat in retirement. They don't. Healthcare costs alone for a couple retiring at 65 average about $315,000 over retirement. That's not covered in the $46,000 annual budget. That's on top. So the real number you need? Closer to $1.4 million. And you're on track for less than half that. Most people respond to this gap by thinking they'll just work longer, or they'll figure it out, or Social Security will help. And Social Security does help. The average benefit is about $1,900 a month. That's $22,800 a year. So instead of needing $46,000 from savings, you need $23,200. That brings the number down from $1.4 million to about $800,000. Still a problem. You're still $100,000 to $200,000 short at current savings rates.
But that's not even the real problem. Here's what actually happens when retirement math doesn't work. You don't just retire later. You retire into a completely different category. You go from retired and financially secure to semi-retired and still needing income. You're 68, 70, 72. You're not working full-time because you can't, physically or mentally, but you're doing something. Part-time work, gig work, consulting if you're lucky, retail if you're not. You're not choosing to work because you love it. You're working because the portfolio you built can't sustain you without supplemental income. And that's a completely different retirement than the one the calculators show you. This is what happens when the numbers don't fully add up. You live in a lower cost of living area. You cut expenses significantly. You work part-time indefinitely. You make it work, but it's not the retirement that was sold to you. And here's the psychological parts that makes this hard. It's called the retirement illusion. You spend your entire working life being told that if you just save diligently, contribute to your 401k, be responsible, you'll be fine. But the math says otherwise for most people. The system isn't designed for comfortable retirement for the average person anymore. It's designed for minimum viable retirement, the lowest possible bar. And even that bar is hard to clear. You're lying awake at 2 a.m. on a random weeknight, Running scenarios. What if you doubled your contributions? Could you afford that? What if you worked until 70 instead of 65? Would that close the gap? What if you just accepted that you'll never fully retire? That tightness in your chest. Not panic, just the quiet weight of realizing the timeline you thought you had doesn't actually exist.
So here's how people who actually retire comfortably think about this. Normal incomes, not $150,000 salaries. Regular people who somehow make it work. They don't think about retirement as an age. They think about it as a number, not $1.15 million by 65. The number is 25 times my annual spending, whenever that happens. That reframe matters, because if you need $40,000 a year instead of $46,000, the number drops to $1 million. If you get expenses down to $35,000, the number is $875,000. Every dollar of annual spending you permanently cut drops your retirement number by $25. So they're not just saving more, they're engineering lower permanent expenses, paying off their house before retirement, no car payments in their 60s, no expensive habits that require high ongoing income. While most people are thinking, how do I save more? They're thinking, how do I need less? And that second question has way more leverage. They're also brutally honest about the timeline. If the math says they can't retire at 65, they don't pretend they can. Maybe retirement is 68. Maybe it's working part-time from 62 onward. But they name it. They know the number and they build toward that specific thing. And here's what changes when you do this. You stop having that low-grade anxiety about retirement. You're not hoping it works out. You know what it requires. And clarity beats vague dread every single time. Now, let me be completely honest. The retirement math most people are working with, save 10% to 15%, retire comfortably at 65, that math was built for a different economy, one with pensions, lower housing costs, lower healthcare costs, more predictable careers. That economy doesn't exist anymore. Recognizing that doesn't fix it, but it means you stop blaming yourself for not meeting a standard that wasn't designed for your actual economic reality. So here's the thing about retirement. It's not about age. It's about the gap between what you can save and what you need. For most people, that gap exists, not because they're bad at saving, because the baseline costs of living have diverged from what normal savings rates can support. The question isn't, can I retire at 65? The question is, what does my actual retirement look like based on my actual numbers? For a lot of people, the answer is semi-retirement, lower spending, part-time income, a different picture than what was advertised. That's not failure. That's just what the math says when you run it honestly.